add variations to it. Thank you. Yeah, so we're about to talk about just reusing components in GitLab and considering the pros and cons of that. So I can share my screen and help illustrate that too. Let me make sure I share the right page. Yeah, so I came up with a couple ideas. Valerie had happened to ask for issues to look at to provide feedback last Friday, so I had asked for her thoughts. But my first idea was use the component basically just as is, maybe change up the button variant slightly. And so it would be something like you click it, you can enter your destination URL. This would be the same like component you do for adding an issue link, essentially. Hit add, you get a list of items. You could add status symbols in there or badges for the response that we get back. And it would go back to its default state. So essentially just out of the box how it works today for related issues. But the problem is for me, I'm like, well, users don't necessarily know what to do with just this empty streams component. So my first thought was, well, let's add the ability to have like an empty state since the whole page is dedicated to this anyways. I'll let that load. So something like this. I mean, this is definitely not like a finalized design by any means, but Valerie's feedback on this specifically was there's some unboxing opportunities here, which I like agree with, but the struggle with a shared component, if we were both using it like for streaming audit events, but also for related issues, is where we impact the design for one area will also impact the other. So just trying to like weigh the pros and cons of that. I was also considering putting it all into a single page, but I really didn't like how this kind of like overloads the user in terms of there's no specific focus. It's just a lot of content all at once. I'll give Figma a quick second to load here. Yeah, so it's just like I could have both things on the same page, but it just feels like a lot of content to be sharing. And for what it's worth, I've seen other sites break this up against a tabular view as well. So I'll pause there and ask Alexis, like, what are your thoughts about me encouraging the use of the related issues input?
Yeah, I think I'd have to look more into the flow of what a user is trying to do here. Like every single, like, are they adding, like creating new objects? Are they like managing them and deleting them often? I would think not, but just FYI, that is something not like super soon, but we're looking into improving this little widget to make it kind of more like the epic tree. So just something to keep in mind where a user can create things and better manage them, or like maybe edit items in line, things like that. Yeah. To make it more of like a child or like, you know, subtask widget. So, but like near term, I think that could make sense just to kind of test this out. And I agree like 1,000,000% that an empty state is needed. If it needs to be shared, maybe something a little bit more generic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question about like, are they going to be adding and removing things frequently? So none of this is technically stored in GitLab per se. It's more like creating a logical destination point. So I guess what's locally stored would be just the connection and then the fact that these things are connected and they should be sending data to it. I think they would want more functionality eventually. Like, for example, with webhooks, you can send different payloads to test how it's currently receiving stuff. You can edit it, but I was thinking just to at least be able to mimic what we can do in the API, this view component would give us a lot of the interactive states that we would need just to get the foundation in place, essentially. But then we run into the issue of, well, eventually it's more than likely that the way that issues relate to their other issues or epics have their child relationships will be different than the way people want to manage streams. But is that a problem that we solve a different day and we stick with the boring solution now and just use the shared component? I don't know. I feel conflicted.
Can the user add here, like link or like relate things here? Because that would make sense. I'm assuming yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they're essentially adding a URL.
I think that makes sense. I mean, there's also kind of like the MRs that get added and you really can't alter them except for removing them. That
Right.
could be another thing to look into. But if the user is going in here and intentionally adding the URLs, I think that could make sense.
Yep. That's exactly how it's done the API. Right now,
Yep.
we ask them for two things. They need a destination point and they need to know their group ID. So this eliminates the need to know your group ID because you would be adding it from the group that you want to send the events from. So all we need to know is where you want this to go.
And then I think like the larger view you were showing would make sense if the user wants to like manage these at all. Because I mean, they can't sort or really do much
Right.
from this view except for adding and deleting. So if you want anything beyond that, I think that maybe this wouldn't make sense. But if it's just very small, okay.
Yeah. So I've talked to our front end, or not front end team, but our back end to try and get some instrumentation in place to check how teams are doing it today. I think I'm going to go off the top of my head. I don't think we're seeing teams use more than 5 destinations. So it's probably going to be more like an average of like 1 to 3 is what probably most people are doing. So I don't think things like sorting are going to be really important. I think it's going to be more just they have a couple destinations that they send it to. It's probably going to like Splunk or something. And that's it. Like just a couple endpoints where they create like a data warehouse of all their information that they want to be able to manage or twist and manipulate whatever way they want to create their own reports.
What were you thinking? Like, maybe you're getting to it. Like, what is the next iteration? What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I'd love to hear first is what problems still exist once they have this opportunity to send this data elsewhere. My initial thing I'm suspecting will be the most problematic is right now we send everything. So one of the things I highlighted when you're adding it is a warning that you're going to be getting all of your audit event data, which can be either sensitive, personal identifiable information potentially, or it could be really high data volume load, like Git events can be really heavy. So they might not want everything. They might only want something very specific. So I suspect that what they're going to want to do next is say, I only want my Git push events sent to Splunk. But right now we're just going to be sending everything. Because we do technically, we do log a number of things. The reason why we introduced like the streaming feature in the first place is there are data heavy events, like I was mentioning, like Git events, like Git push, pull, clone, that can be very transaction heavy that we can't support in our database. So instead of telling users, hey, you can't have this data at all, we're saying, hey, you can have it, just you got to go take care of the data. We can't manage it for you. Our infrastructure can't scale to that level.
Okay, so they're adding above and then all the information.
Oh, just to be clear, this was like an
Yeah.
alternative design that I don't really want to go with. I was just using this to jump to the page where you could see all there's an event table. So what you're maybe not noticing here is there's a log page and a streams page. So log page would be your data table of all the events that GitLab captures automatically and can show you in the UI. Your stream would be where you send all of your event data to.
Are they editing this often? Just wondering.
You know, I was also debating that, like, oh man, just they want to probably go in and edit the URL slug. real quickly, because you don't get that technically right now with related issues. You got to just delete it and re-add it. I think that would be fine. I think in the API right now, you have to basically do the same, delete it and re-add your destination. So I think I actually probably would align even better with our API right now, because I don't think you can actually edit the API. Maybe you can. I'm not very good at APIs. That's my downfall. Daniel or Nick, do you all have any thoughts or considerations for me?
Kind of still trying to digest the problem.
Yeah, so I'll reframe my feedback one more time. Maybe that'll give you a chance to jump in. Right now, the event data that is captured by GitLab is presented in a table, but it's missing some of the events because our infrastructure can't handle them. So we're sending that data. We're allowing users to send that data elsewhere. This has been made available through our API, but we haven't made it possible to set up that destination endpoint in the UI. So as a follow-up to we're calling it iteration 0, which was the backend only implementation, adding a front end section to audit events in order to say, this is where you can send the data to. And I was looking for the most boring solution I could find to implement. The most boring solution I could find was reusing a component that Issues has, which honestly, it's this thing. It's just, you can add, but instead of like adding this radio button, it's just going to be the destination URL. You can put it in, hit add, cancel, or whatever, and it would appear in the list. So reusing that front end component to manage the streams that users can set up.
So is it exporting data to like some other service or an API or something, or is it just exporting it to a CSV or a file or something?
Nope, it's sending it.
Okay.
Yeah, we've it's all documented in our well, it's documented in the docs, but yeah, there's several different formats in which you can send data outside of GitLab, and that's outlined in our docs.
You're basically setting up a connection between services, ours and wherever. I'm reminded when you were talking about this in the office hours, I think. Like given my background, a credit card, like you are currently sharing your data with Mint, and it's, you know, I set that connection up. Cool, I'm good. Those two services are talking for whatever reason I've set up for, but when you were talking about this, like I like the boring solution, honestly. I think that it's a great way, at least in an MVC sort of like in the first iteration, like that's where we can go with it. As far as the unboxing goes, I agree with, you know, there are a lot of boxes that become redundant when you sort of add that, but I also see the like pitfalls of like editing the master or you know, but then my first question would be, could you update the actual master component at a base level?
Yeah, you could. I think that's where my tension lies in, is I think I'm maybe a little bit scared to use a shared component in such a different context, because hey, if unknowingly the project planning team makes a change to that component, it will impact us. And so that's maybe where my hesitancy comes in. But I also am like, well, we already built this whole shared component in Vue today. Why would we not reuse something that's basically doing the same thing, at least as MVC? I guess it could be considered a problem to solve in the future if we need to extend the feature beyond what the limitations of the component are today. But maybe I'm just over engineering the design at this point.
Are there always going to be multiple destinations that you send it to? Could an MVC just be like a single one?
Yeah, so we've been looking at some of the data, and it looks like they're at least setting up multiple right now.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this sort of thing, like my instinct, but then again, I'm biased coming from analytics and from workspaces, is just to whack it in an inline editable table. It doesn't need to be fancy. Like in that table, you can just have the the input destination URL input components, and then like rows, and then you press the button and it just adds a row. I'm sure like it should be relatively easy to configure that, since we have the table as a component already as well. This seems
we do have the table component, but I have not found anything in Storybook to suggest that we can edit input fields. We can do like toggles and buttons, but there hasn't been anything with input fields, and it got kind of messy to try and manage the like save and cancel buttons for each row. So I think I think it's possible, Nick. I think you're right. Like it's possible to add a table, but I think it would actually end up being more engineering effort to get to it.
Well, rather than just a table, can you just make a list and then like just basically a form? This is effectively a form.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
like if you look at value stream,
Mhm.
if you go to value stream and then the edit button in value stream.
Mhm. Well, I might not have access here to do that.
At
but
the group level.
hey, that's always the fun part, right? Group or project level.
And then it takes you to the group overview page rather than the actual value stream page. Yeah, you go to edit. So this experience right here is sort of a little bit similar. You wouldn't need any of like the craziness, but you could basically just in that add another stage, and then it gives you that. You can add another stage. You can remove that. Like you could just make a form on the page which effectively does that sort of thing, and then that would unbox it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's true. I'm gonna check this out and dig into the view component. Thanks,
Cool.
Nick.
No worries.
Sweet. I'll kick it over to you then, because I think you have the next point.
Sure. So I have been working a little bit on the hellscape that is navigation for GitLab, and I've been doing a little bit of thinking, and basically I think I've pinpointed what the problem with navigation is. So I'm going to quickly pitch to you from my perspective why our navigation is so frustrating to so many users, and then I'm going to pitch to you a little solution, which I'm not necessarily tied to, but just to get like tangibly like how we may approach this across. So to start out with, I need to find where my stuff is. Okay. And then as per usual, Zoom always has stuff in the way. Okay. So we in GitLab have two dimensions of navigation. We have the dimension of the sidebar, or in other words, the features that GitLab has. And then we also have the dimension of the actual like namespaces, the containers, which pretty much fit within this menu. So if you think about it, we've really optimized our navigation to allow users to go across features as easily as possible. So there's everything just 1 or 2 clicks away at most. However, we haven't made it all that easy to navigate across namespaces. You need to go into this. If you're lucky, it'll be infrequently visited, but that changes all the time. And then like maybe you go into the your projects section, and then you can navigate through all these sort of, you can filter by name, or you can go to your starred projects. Basically, it's very easy to navigate through features, but it's not so easy or not so quick to navigate through namespaces. And if you think about it, users tend to have probably a small subset of namespaces that they're particularly interested in, compared to all the namespaces that are available for them in their broader organization or instance or whatever that may be. So for example, me, a designer within GitLab, I'm interested in gitlab.org, gitlog.com, pajamas, GitLab UI, this sort of stuff. So this is my hypothesis. By making namespace navigation equal priority to feature navigation, we'll be able to reduce wayfinding confusion. So I think a lot of people get confused as to where they actually are, what container they're in, and also to speed up cross namespace workflows. And this in turn should help to have a tangible impact on SUS, because navigation and discovery is a key thing here. So I'll pause there at the sort of problem statement and hypothesis and see if there's any questions or comments, anything like that.
I definitely would say I experienced this pain maybe more so in my last role, or well, really my last company, I should say. At primarily GitLab, I'm mostly just operating GitLab. There are rare occasions where I have to go to like the GitLab design project or UX research project. It's rare, but it was more painful at my previous organization because like every single app that we worked on had like multiple projects, and that was mostly due to annoying bureaucratic rules that were like only the true developers could have access to the project with the code repository in it. They didn't want the designers to be in that project. So then project managers had the issues in a different project, and the developers had their code in a different project. And then the designers had a different project where they collaborate on designs, because that's how they broke up issues. They didn't want the design issues cluttering with the build issues. Couldn't have that. Can't use labels.
We're actually kind of doing that now. Also, is kind of frustrating. I don't know if there's a whole the managed sub workspace or subgroup, which is kind of frustrating. It's like, why are we doing this? Because I can't link any issues anymore. So yeah, I definitely can identify with the problem.
Yeah. Anyways, I was gonna cap that off by just saying I don't know if it's necessarily an issue with the navigation or if it's users trying to work around the organization of the product. Like, I wonder if one is causing the problem of the other. And I was curious if you thought like namespaces, for example, or rather with Workspace, if that would resolve some of the navigational challenges if we weren't so driven by having to go into different groups to find that subgroup that has that project that we care about that isn't GitLab.
Okay, let me try and unpick that. So I think I don't have all the information. I've been trying to look for it, but I think the reason that we're so, I mean, obviously, our information architecture originated with just like the project. So everything just sort of like the project was the original organizing construct for everything. And then since there we're like, oh, we'll tack on some groups and then we can organize some projects together. So the challenge that emerged by creating groups separately is that groups have different features than projects. And that means that there's no easy way to like have a consistent sidebar or a consistent set of features between projects and groups. And so I think the solution was to hide projects and groups in their own menu, and then from there you'd have be able to like pick up a different sidebar, if that sort of makes sense. So with namespaces, what's useful is we now have this opportunity where projects, groups, everything's going to be collapsed into one thing, and then therefore we should have consistent navigation across each and every container. That may be slightly restricted based on what users configure their namespaces to actually contain. But there's a level of consistency that's afforded by namespaces that we didn't have before. So that means that we can bring forward namespace navigation to be like a first-class navigation right alongside features. And that should make life a lot easier for people who are working with multiple projects, whatever it may be. Moreover, because namespaces can be nested within each other, that means that each namespace that is sort of a parent of the child one aggregates content up from their children, meaning that you can see a lot of the content coming up from the child namespaces alongside one another. And I'll dive in. I think I'll be able to answer, rather than communicating just by talking. Let me just show you the prototype, and hopefully that makes more sense. Okay. So yeah, well, I think we were talking about this single namespace bias that we're talking, and loss of feature context, where it, like I'm in issues right now, and then if I click into GitLab org, like I'm no longer in issues, it just takes me to the overview page. So and then it's not always obvious. You can skip across that pretty easily as well. So this is my little prototype, and it's inspired by Slack. And what I liked about Slack is they had two separate menus, one for their channels and one separate menu for their workspaces. So in this case, we have the feature menu, as we know and love, and I've moved the workspace menu over to the side here. So you basically have namespace times features equals the content that you're seeing here, but I'm not wedded to the visual design at all. And what we can get here is we can have the all GitLab view, which is effectively the top level workspace, and this aggregates all the content up from the namespaces below it. We have like starred spaces, so all the spaces that you starred, potentially you can aggregate the content from those together, or you can go into like the individual spaces themselves, like you go into gitlab.org as well. We have a little collapse thing going on here as well. But effectively, what we've done is we've sort of allowed users to quickly keep the context of the feature that they're in. So for example, GitLab overview, and switch between the spaces that are actually important for them. So this gives you all the content that you have access to. This gives you the content that you have access to, which is starred, and this is the specific container. So this is making it a little bit easier to navigate across these things and then change the scope of the namespaces that you're actually interested in, whilst keeping this context of the features going on. And like by clicking on thing like, so you can add namespaces just like to this bar right here. These would be your favorite ones. I'm assuming at the moment that there may be 10 namespaces that users are interested in at once, but I'll do some testing on that. And then you can add additional ones, say by starring them here, or maybe go to this and you can like add to sidebar or something like that. But this is how you navigate. So that's my thinking so far. And I'd love to get your feedback sort of just on whether I've pinpointed the problem with the two different types of navigation, and what you think of like the proposed solution of having like bookmarked favorites for users as well. I mean, the visual design here is pretty scrappy, so I'm not too concerned about like feedback on styles and that, and like polishing that up. I'm more interested in like layout and concepts.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same, Blair, about Discord, but not focusing too much on the UI component. My only last thought, Nick, is I think you did address my question, which was I think workspaces should help by not keep creating such a separation between groups and projects, which is this whole intent. So there's less things that you should have to navigate to find that sub thing you care about. So I mean, I think it makes sense from that perspective. If we can truly reach that that goal of our architecture, I think the struggle will still be like, I don't know if you can necessarily get away from still needing to go 2 clicks to get to the GitLab org's value stream versus GitLabs. But I think that's just when workspaces kind of evolves, it might take care of that itself. So
yeah, I think what may be useful here is if you read the workspace jobs to be done a document that I created, and that sort of talks about cascading stuff down, aggregating stuff up, and this basically means that it's a little bit easier and creates less constraints by having to navigate the folder structure of GitLab groups and projects.
I was gonna say I did see the prototype earlier, and I think it made sense. I've seen the idea of the Slack workspace switcher as a way of doing it. I think Twitter has the same behavior. Like if you have multiple profiles, you can switch them on the left. But yeah, I think the idea and the direction is sound because it's similar to other environments. You know, Drew mentioned, Blair mentioned Discord.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, this is one part of the exploration. I'm just basically taking some different ideas from companies and using those as a jumping off point and just doing some different explorations that way, being divergent. So I'll take a look at Discord and I'll do some other stuff as well. I think Figma is quite interesting because Figma has those 2 dimensions of navigation as well in terms of pages and layers. So potentially we could stack stuff in the menu and see how that looks. But yeah, more to come.
One thing that I had feedback on, or at least just from other, like for example, the system usability score, the navigation in general is too much. There's just too many features that people don't use or never use. So I'm curious how much you'll be able to reduce that as part of this work to help the navigation concerns that you're having.
Yeah, so I'm going to follow that up in a separate issue, and I'm going to call it like feature navigation rather than namespace navigation. And I'll have a think about how we could potentially create simpler features or how we can maybe bundle stuff together. Basically, I have a question, which is Marcel laid out like what are the most popular pages within GitLab and sort of showed us how that ranked against all the stuff in the navigation. What I'd like to do is ask the question, where are the clusters of pages that people tend to navigate between, and how might we cluster those together? So everything right now is sort of organized at the object level. I'm just wondering whether we could potentially stack objects together in the same page. And then I'm also wondering whether we can pull things together, like, for example, press the wrong button there. For example, if I go into GitLab here, we have issues, and that is, well, how I define that as project planning. And then we have like, oh, this is this again, this highlights the confusion. So yeah, we have like labels within group information, even though sort of labels potentially should exist within like the likes of issues and epics and stuff. So I'm thinking whether using like objects as the key feature navigation item is the correct thing here, or whether we start to cluster them together into something like, say, dev, sec, and ops, or whatever that may be. Obviously, I'm not the biggest expert in each and every one of these things, so I'll be working with the likes of Alexis and all the other teams and stage groups to help me out with that. But first of all, I want to get the data from the team to see whether there's a like sort of a affinity map we can create for all these features together, and whether we can organize them in a slightly different way, optimize it a bit.
Just want to we're not quite at time yet. Just want to say in particular that this was I found very useful, very and great. Just goes to show how awesome the Planage team is, honestly, like varied backgrounds, and I love the feedback. Let's make sure that this recording gets socialized somehow, because I think that this would be extremely helpful for other stage groups as well. We're kind of talking on the very micro level with Austin's talk, and then the very macro level that affects everyone on the Nick level. Sorry to interrupt if someone else had more feedback there.
Alexis did, but she's typing.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying like it would be helpful for me to just see like a flow or like a scenario how a user would be navigating. I mean, you said this is rough, Nick, just, you know, seeing how they'd navigate that, maybe like the group project issue, or like how to make epics more discoverable using this new, workspaces setup, something like that. That would help me wrap my head around this a little bit better, and how also some of those like cascading up issues we have.
Sure.
But
Yeah. I think that'll definitely emerge in like the feature navigation issue that I create in a bit.
Maybe a question for my future self. How can the foundations group help? Or rather, is there anything that you're expecting of them in this area, since they technically have navigation and settings as their group or category?
Good question. I think like I'm not the biggest expert on visual design, so taking some of the concepts that I've put out here, some of the rough things, and actually putting a polish on them so they don't look terrible would be a great help. I think also working with the jobs to be done document that I mentioned before, and thinking about how different teams can plug in to the documents to the jobs that I've laid out within that document, and see whether we can sort of create a framework in pajamas for using that to sort of manage the nav and like behaviors that happen between levels of hierarchy. All very abstract. So yeah, I'm going to try and prototype out as much of this as possible so people can understand what I'm talking about. I've just been stuck in information architecture land for a while.
Yeah, I think the other thing you're fighting with us, not like contentiously, just we all have our biased mindsets around how GitLab works today. So at least for me, I have a roadblock of envisioning if there wasn't this separation of features between groups and projects, what would navigating that experience look like?
Yeah, let's try and prototype it out and say,
what could it be like? Run through those scenarios like Alexis said.
Super. All right. Well, yeah, 5 minutes left. Any other questions, comments, or we can move on to something else? I think we can probably have 4 minutes back then. All right. See ya.
See you later.
Bye.
Okay.